Sometimes a picture or video says more than any words can say, or that I can come up with anyway. This brings us to the images coming out of Los Angeles. Beautiful, right? This is the wholesale theft of Union Pacific Railroad containers, leaving thousands of broken packages, damn near blanketing tracks and images that bring to mind places like, Calcutta, India. That's our new woke society in action. What it is not is all the idiotic things the press has been trying to blame it on. And I'm looking right at you, the Los Angeles Times. Union Pacific, similar to Walgreens and so many other stores over in San Francisco, is ready to throw in the towel on Los Angeles because these thefts are out of control. Something like 1 out of every 6 containers now gets broken into, and very few thieves are ever really prosecuted. Woke law is really the problem here. What's the proof? Well, the words of Union Pacific in its plea to far-left Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon is at least a clue. Kristen Lazar of CBS Los Angeles tweeted out, "Letter from Union Pacific to Los Angeles District Attorney's Office on rise in train robberies. 90 containers breached a day. Theft up 356%, says Union Pacific. Union Pacific considering rerouting its trains out of Los Angeles County. Now there is a good idea. Union Pacific asked District Attorney to be harder on thieves, says they're back on the tracks a day after released." Now that pretty much lays it out right in front of you, easy to see, but don't imagine that the press, at least nationally, has caught on. We'll watch some local news right after this quick commercial break to pay some bills. Friends, I'm going to point out the obvious. It seems like big government and big tech are trying to destroy America. Everything they touch turns into a disaster. Pretty soon the whole system will fall apart, and the first thing to fall will be the food supply chain. So, do you have enough emergency food to get through a serious long-term crisis where you can't get food at the grocery store? Most people don't, and they'll panic when the time comes. That is why the smart move now is to get long-term storage emergency food before things go bad. I highly recommend My Patriot Supply. They've served millions of American families and have over 41,000 4-star and 5-star reviews. Their mission is your survival, and right now you can save 25% on a 4-week kit of emergency food that will save the day, probably soon. Order a starter kit for each member of your family and they'll ship everything quickly and discreetly to your door. Go to preparewithresurgence.com so you can claim your 4-week emergency food kit and save 25% in the process. That's preparewithresurgence.com or hit that link in the description box.
The images are startling. Thousands of empty or damaged packages lining the tracks along the Union Pacific LA Railway. Amazon packages, UPS boxes, all meant for delivery to customers along the West Coast. They're opened by cargo thieves who take advantage of the trains stopping or slowing down to break into the containers. Union Pacific officials saying they've had a 160% increase in cargo thefts in the LA County area, with over 90 containers broken into every day.
The arrests are happening. We're working with LAPD and LA County sheriffs. They are helping us in terms of arrest individuals who are in and out like a revolving door and come right back to perpetrate the crime. There's no consequence to this type of theft because there's now no bail for the most part, and they're put as misdemeanor crimes. They're no longer felonies.
Can they make the containers more secure?
Many people may not know that the containers are not owned by Union Pacific Railroad. They're owned by our customers. And so we are working with our customers to kind of harden the ability for them to break in. But if people are committed to try to break in, they will find the tools necessary to try to break in.
Okay, so the rich kids over at the Los Angeles Times, whose headquarters happens to be within walking distance from the mess on the tracks from hell, this straight out of an apocalypse movie somehow wasn't noticed, meaning they missed the big story that CBS got that was literally right in front of their reporters' eyes for weeks now. So after catching up, their brilliant observation was to claim that the problem is vague e-commerce and geography, with a little bit of blame the victim, of course. They were also very careful not to mention that the district attorney doesn't really prosecute looters. Imagine that. Here's just a little taste of the soft propaganda they expect to get paid for, somehow. You know, I'm surprised the word thief isn't considered racist yet. Well, just give it time, right? Quote, thieves are pilfering railroad cars in a crime that harks back to the days of horseback riding bandits. It is fueled by a host of modern realities, including the rise of e-commerce and Southern California's role as a hub for the movement of goods, unquote. So actually they didn't have e-commerce, and Southern California was never a hub for trade until the last year or two when this shit show unfolded. Don't believe me? Google it. Pretty simple. You know, this wouldn't pass a 6th grade term paper as far as logic goes. And like the packages all over the tracks, the answer is right in front of their faces. Los Angeles has a sick, pathetic district attorney who refuses to prosecute crimes. That's what's really happening here. But, like the track shambles itself, they don't acknowledge it. And it's a really big story now, making national headlines, given that most Americans had no idea that their country had gone this far down into becoming a third world hellhole. The practical problems are obvious too. Rail shipments are a linchpin of the supply chain, and these thefts are not only keeping store shelves empty, but are also raising prices, as the cost of theft is always passed on to the customer. The Times might have gotten a clue from Union Pacific, which wrote this letter to Gascon about the mass lootings of their freight trains last month. Bill Melugin tweeted out, last month Union Pacific sent the Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon a letter about the mass looting of their trains and expressed frustration with Gascon's soft-on-crime policies. 100 plus arrests, most suspects released within 24 hours on zero bail. Union Pacific now considering avoiding Los Angeles County. You see, the land-based pirates operating in rings break into the boxcars and shipping containers because they have no fear of prosecution whatsoever. Store shelves go empty, and get this, even COVID test kits get tossed aside on the tracks in pursuit of flat-screen televisions and cell phones, I'm sure, leaving pharmacies empty. Oh, so that's where all of Joe Biden's tests went. Okay, I got it. Anyways, missing package claims are filed to the tune of billions with the Postal Service and retailers. What we're looking at really is a wholesale merger of the supply chain crisis and the George Soros-created crime crisis right there in Los Angeles for all of us to see. And man, it's ugly. So they, meaning the Los Angeles Times, could have had that story, but they had a narrative, you see. So their story got really light and really fluffy. Kind of like a high school newspaper, let's say. Well, actually worse, because a high school newspaper probably wouldn't blame the victim. Union Pacific is charged with guarding the rail areas and has just private security to keep thieves away. Cops don't enforce that area. The Los Angeles Times couched all of the complaints coming from the Union Pacific about the extent of theft as something the company, quote, claimed to start. This is suggesting that maybe the company was exaggerating or lying. This is what they do. Then, of course, it gets worse as they spin out of control, blaming Union Pacific for the mess by claiming itself that the railroad doesn't hire enough security guards. Quote, Union Pacific is deploying more drones, has brought in extra security, and enlisted the Los Angeles Police Department, California Highway Patrol, and the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department to combat the thefts, Guerrero said. But Union Pacific is partly to blame for not deploying more security, said Los Angeles Police Captain Jermaine Hurtado, who works in the Hellenbach Division. Quote, we have millions of dollars in items and equipment, but it is unpoliced, Hurtado said. Quote, there are even sometimes weapons on these trains. Everything goes by trains. You learn, unquote. Yeah, but here's the thing. The rail line didn't need large numbers of guards in the past, nor do they need brigades of guards when they pull into other stations in other cities. But that little bitty issue escaped the Los Angeles Times, and apparently the captain as well, who maybe I don't blame so much. Hard to see the forest through the trees sometimes, you know? But wouldn't you know, next the Times got out the gaslights, claiming that the crime isn't happening at all, and it's all in our heads. Quote, though Los Angeles has seen a significant increase in homicides over the last 2 years, property crimes like the rail thefts are a different story. According to Los Angeles Police Department data, through November 27th, property crime was up 2.6% over the same period last year, but is down 6.6% from 2019, unquote. So I guess we should just move on because there's nothing to see here, right? That stat is literally irrelevant. It doesn't describe what's happening at the Union Pacific Depot. It also barely notes that crimes are not being reported. When the Union Pacific guards pick up a looter, the far-left district attorney of Los Angeles doesn't bother to prosecute. Why go through the bother of reporting a crime if the district attorney is just going to fail to prosecute? The Times included a crummy statement that should have been a, quote, claim from the DA's office that the crimes they don't prosecute simply don't have enough evidence. Does that sound familiar? It probably does, because that's the Chesapeake Dean line up the road in San Francisco too. Gee, it's almost like they read from the same talking points. Huh. Win-win for the looters, of course, and a solid win for the Soros left. Not surprisingly, these shambles that have followed very likely led to the train derailment in Los Angeles just the other day. You see, that much crap on the tracks has to eventually contain something hard enough or massive enough to damage tracks or maybe even derail by itself a slow-moving freight train getting into or out of the station. So the shambles are getting a little bit harder every day to defend. Lastly, woke law is causing all of these problems. And the minute Los Angeles gets a district attorney willing to prosecute crimes to protect America's supply chain, the thieves will be gone. And in the best scenario, locked up, of course. And once again, the mainstream covering up for these pirates and looters and explaining away the shambles makes one wonder who these people are really working for. But at the end of the day, it's a simple answer. Woke law and order, and only woke law and order, is behind this lunacy. Most of this came by way of The American Thinker, written by the great Monica Showalter. If you liked it, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't. Leave a comment down below. There's a PayPal link in the description box, so please put $1 in the bucket on the way out the door. I'd like to thank everyone for all your donations. They're much needed and much appreciated. Now, with all that being said, we'll see you next time.
Come on, move. Move. Easy, easy.